I'm really, really excited to be here talking about, using purpose in people to guide your professional transition. As Maggie said, I am the founder and CEO of the Summit, and we work, exclusively with women to help them find and, most importantly, take action on behalf of their unique purpose. And I will say our key sort of differential is we believe in expediency and we honor experience, and we have the opportunity to do that kind of work in one day, mostly. And by way of background, you'll hear a little bit more about me as the presentation progresses, but just a quick background. I am a wife, a mother of 2 teenagers who I adore. I live in Brooklyn, New York, and I have been in and out of professional roles, since my career began, probably 25 years now. And the last of which, before I started the Summit, was a 12-year run at City Harvest, which is a nonprofit here in New York City. And I worked to develop and implement strategic programs to service the hungry of New York City. And I mentioned the 20 to 25-year in and out of professional roles because, as we know, as women, we're tasked often to transition and pivot depending on the needs of those around us. So I'm very familiar with transition. I'm very familiar with personal transition and professional transition. So I'm really excited to share my work and thoughts with you. So with that, without further ado, I wanted to start with a little bit of a provocative thought, I guess not too provocative, but I believe, and it's noted, that purpose is the new black. And I mention this because, first of all, I'm married to a man who has been in the space of corporate social responsibility for 20 years, I think even before it was called social responsibility. And what we're seeing today is, millennials that in large part are driving our economy of this country are both, as consumers, insisting that, the top 500 companies in our country describe their purpose, describe what they do, why they do what they do, describe their environmental impact on what they do, their social impact on what they do. So there's a demand from the consumer end to state purpose and share it. And then from the talent pool, we have that same group that's insisting that companies cater to, that life work balance, or I guess life-work success equation it's being called now. So the good news on both of those fronts is that purpose is something that we're talking about pretty deliberately. And certainly in this new our new regime, our new government, I've talked to many, many women who are really concerned about, their role in the world in which we live. Not so much concerned, but galvanized to take part in a more active way. So it's an exciting time in the world of purpose. And with that, I see it as the bedrock and a huge opportunity as people are looking to pivot professionally to take time to think about purpose, to think about it very seriously, and to think about meaning. So as promised in the invite, today I'm going to talk about 3 things, and they'll be broken up a little bit. One, I wanted to talk about the relationship between meaning and happiness. 2, I was going to try and give you sort of the top 4 tips I've garnered over the last 3 years for taking hold of a transition process, of your transition process. And 3, I wanted to share, I love in my work, or our work here, we do a lot of interactive activities. We're guided by the assumption that most people have a lot of the answers, present inside them. And so it's just a matter of mining them. So I wanted to share a couple of those activities with you today, and then give you a homework assignment if you wanted it. So to start, the second new black is happiness. I know, the New York Times, top-selling nonfiction in the last 3 years have had scores of books around happiness, how the happiness comes to us, what are the best practices for successful garnering of happiness? The Happiness Project with Gretchen Rubin, who's wonderful, Stumbling on Happiness with Daniel Gilbert. And recently I was afforded the opportunity to be in the company of an Amherst professor, a PhD professor in psychology from Amherst. Her name is Catherine Sanderson, and she just did sort of meta look at all the work that's being done around happiness. And I can't cite exactly where the absolute specifics, but she and her colleagues in this meta study garnered what they called three kind of largest buckets of happiness. They call it the three components of happiness. And of course the first one is that comes to mind for everybody is sort of vacations and chocolate and coffee and the simple pleasures or grand tactical pleasures. But the reality for her research is that meaning is actually the number one indicator for success of happiness. So what you're doing and what you care about is a number one. And second, according to Dr. Sanderson, is engagement. And engagement falls into two categories, one of which is meaningful connections with others, and the second is experiences. So over material objects, which are just sort of a big black hole whereby you just want to buy the next best car because you got a good car last year, you just keep joining to get into that higher level, and that's short-term satisfaction. It's actually in experiences that we get the most or experience the most happiness. And third actually is that pleasure bucket. So it's not insignificant, but it's definitely not first. So I read all about kind of workplace happiness, and one of the things I read recently is that 70% of the people in this country are basically straw poll or disengaged from their work. And what that says to me is that they're not finding meaning, right? They've lost that connection between their work, what they thought they were passionate, and what they're doing, and they're experiencing burnout, and they're leaving. They're leaving their places of work. So meaning is not just the woo-woo of meaning. Meaning is actually an economic incentive, a way to keep people in the work that they do, and for employees to approach their work with purpose. So many of the women that we work with in the summit are stuck, and I actually like stuck. I've been very stuck in my life and didn't like it so much, but now that I'm on the other side of that and I work very hard to help others, I see the variety of reasons they are stuck, and particularly when it comes to professional pursuits for those women who are in a job where they're not necessarily inspired, but it's sort of what they know and what they stick with. For those women who have been out of work for some period of time and have lost their confidence and their kind of sense of value, they're stuck in a way of not being able to put themselves forward in a way that makes them feel confident and competent. For those women who are sort of in the golden handcuff, they have a career that affords them the lifestyle that they're accustomed to. And then there's a woman, I think, which is more like me, sort of my ego was tied to what I was doing and who I was at City Harvest, trying to save the world, one hungry New Yorker at a time. And my ego was really very much tied to my career set. But what I would say now is the reality, I think, is that we are not really afforded. There's no HR department outside of your current employer, or even culturally, that says, what, Sheilah, let's just sit down. We're going to sit down. We're going to mine everything we know about you, and we're going to take a focused look at what makes you unique and what makes you happy. And if we were all afforded that just on a regular basis, much like they do at work when they're giving you evaluations quarterly, why wouldn't we do that for ourselves? And so the transition process in my mind, is only as strong as your ability to do that work, to do that mining. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. So stuck is relative, and we can all get unstuck. So just for the purposes, I mentioned a couple exercises. Do me a favor and think about a change you want to make. You're on this call probably because you're in some sort of professional transition, perhaps. But and while you're thinking about that change, start to think about what to date may be getting in your way. And I'm going to give you a couple minutes to think about that. Not minutes, a couple of seconds. So, we are not therapists here as a summit. I never purport to be a therapist. But what I do know is that we, as women, are often strong with limited beliefs. We're strong with deep fears about, the repercussions of us changing, of our shifting our gears, changing our professional lives, changing our images as professionals. But I honestly, so for me, I started the summit after I had what I would describe as an abrupt health crisis that kind of took over my life. So I was lucky in a way. I couldn't indulge my fears anymore of change. I had to go dive headfirst into changing myself. And I had to reconsider everything that was important to me. And as I mentioned, there was no HR department available at the time. And so I had to find my own. And by reaching out to the people who knew me best, I found the summit, or rather the summit found me, and started the journey of this acting like an asset looking to be placed in the right place. So I'll tell you, I'm fine. I'm back to my health, but it was a very harrowing time, and I feel lucky that I got out of my own way because I absolutely had to. So it's a nice segue, I would say, to this idea of what are these top tips to help us take hold of the transition process. Again, for me, it was a health scare, so I was forced into it. But in hindsight, and now working with many, many women who are in this process, I feel like I've come away with some nuggets that I think will help you. The first one is what I love to call summoning your inner CEO. And I love this phrase because, we don't all want to be CEOs of companies, but we all have a CEO inside of us. We all have that person who, has taken on the leadership role in the face of possibilities for her family, her children, her spouse, her former spouse, her school involvement, her place of worship, right? So those same executive functions, we need to start looking at as assets as we look towards our own professional pivot. And the beauty of a CEO also is, if you study CEOs, they have just a few, well, they have many characteristics in mind, but a few kind of distilled ones, and three that I like to come away with that I think are really important in a professional transition is let's say four. They have a certain objectivity, so it allows you to be forward-thinking without as much of the emotional connection, but more of a tactical viewpoint of, this is a project that you're taking on, and you're going to take active steps towards its conclusion. There's an element of courage that all CEOs, I think, hold, a leadership that moves their culture, their mission forward. And there's also this idea of decision-making, right? CEOs are forced to make decisions, and when you make decisions, you take action. And I find the very hardest thing for many women to do is take that first step, right? Take that one action that will beget the next action. Again, I was afforded the opportunity to do that because I had to. And if I could only give the best piece of advice to someone, it's like, take that first step. And perhaps being on this webinar is your first step, so That's wonderful. Keep it up and keep taking steps towards conclusion. Okay. You will start thinking much more tactically, I will say, if you put that CEO hat on. So the second I would encourage you to do, and I love this idea of becoming a joy researcher. And I mean a joy researcher for yourself. So that means in the face of leisure, that means in the face of a professional environment, you are looking at yourself and saying, what are those moments where I feel my absolute self? What are those moments where I feel like the reason I'm here for a real reason? I actually, in part, created this moment. I brought my skill set, my strengths to this moment. What was it about this moment that was so perfect for me? Am I collaborating? Am I leading? Am I making decisions? Am I negotiating? Am I dreaming? Am I reading? What are those moments? And just start to document those. Be your own joy researcher. And I always suggest that you can ask others, where have you seen me, right? So that you see me at my best. What's happening? What's going on? And then try and get to sort of the meta level, the micro level of that. Like, what are those elements that are within that? And in the spirit of exercises, and you can do this, we'll do this really briefly here, but I would encourage you to do this offline and do it with a friend, do it at a party. Try and think of a perfect moment, right? Just, you can even close your eyes right now, but try and think of a moment, like I said, where it just felt like it was absolutely right. Where were you? Who else was there? What was actually happening? How did you feel? And again, what part did you play? There's this expert on employee happiness, the CEO of Happiness Works. His name is Nick Marks, and he would say that happiness at work in particular boils down to 3 positive emotions, right? There's a certain enthusiasm or a high energy state that seizes that opportunity, you within that opportunity. There's a focus, there's absolute interest and a focus and energy that is committed to the task. And then there's contentment. It says, related to the fact that I had success in this moment, I'm going to perform like this again, right? I'm going to repeat to have that sense of success in the future. So think about that perfect moment for yourself. And then again, bank those. Start thinking about what are the elements. So my second tip for taking hold of a transition process, my third tip for taking hold of a transition process is to make the inventory fun. I'm sure some of you have done this in the past, perhaps as employee counselor or career counselor. I like it much like finding the perfect moment and seeing where you are and what elements are in there. I believe that taking hold of this inventory idea is really part of a much bigger picture, and in that it can be much more fun. At the summit, and this could happen anywhere, you could do it for yourself, we focus on what is considered a behavioral science type of approach to change, and we look at which is called appreciative inquiry. Appreciative inquiry is used in office environments too, with groups to move forward, and it's very effective when working with individuals to think, to focus solely on assets, not consider deficits, but as building blocks to think about assets. So we certainly have our deficit pile, and we put it in what I call our challenges list, but by the time we get through our work, most of the time those deficits have been way overridden by the assets that are driving the energy in the train. Oops. So I'm going to ask you to do one more exercise along this idea of assets. A lot of people I think in part being sort of burnt out by their current circumstances or being asked to flex so much in their work have in part sort of lost sight of their assets, right? They've gotten somewhat diluted and or they're not fully recognized or being activated where they are. So one of my favorite books is written by a gentleman named Gay Hendricks, and it's called The Big Leap. And the book is actually about limiting beliefs, but he has an exercise in there that I just find fascinating, and I love to share with women, and I hope, again, you can share it outside of this conversation. And it goes like this. He suggests that we are all operating on one of three levels of genius. The first level is what he calls the level of competence. So I'm at my best when I'm blank, and I'll walk through this again with you. But so that's our level of competence. So let's say I'm at my best when I'm teaching. The second level is what he would describe as the level of excellence. And so you take your first level of competence and you say, I'm at my best when I'm teaching, but when I'm at my best teaching, the exact thing I'm doing is, and let's say it's teaching comparative literature, American literature to high school students. Then he would say, within that, there's actually a third level for you and for most people, and that is when I'm doing that, when I'm teaching comparative literature to high school students, when I'm doing that, the thing that I'm most good at is relating on a very visceral level to, a 17-year-old, a group of 17-year-old girls who don't care much about anything other than what they look like that day, and really gaining their attention and their respect, and then knowing that they're understanding what I'm trying to relay as part of history. So, again, for you, and I could give other examples, but this is a really fun exercise to think about because not only does it identify sort of, areas that you like to orbit in, but also sort of forces you to really think about those places that you are at your absolute best. And that, again, is sort of the brand and calling card you want to be taking into this transition phase so that you can be articulate when you're in front of, interviewer or whomever, and you can say with confidence what you want to bring to bear to that relationship. So I won't go into the depths of the detail of this, but one of the things that, again, if we actually just take the time and do this kind of inventory work, what we do is we look at, kind of natural talents, which we've been talking a little bit about. We look at passions and interests. We look at lifestyle and work style, because we know the importance of lifestyle in particular and work style as it's changing so dramatically that we want to be sure that those have equal weight as do natural talents and passions when going towards our next career phase. And then after we've done those inventories, we ask each of the women that we work with to really prioritize the ones that make the most sense for them now. And that's the beauty of our work. It's not, for example, you could have a natural talent that you've had since you were 18 and people know you by it, but you really don't want to be firing on that cylinder, going forward. You have others that you want to consider. So once we've done the inventory and the prioritizing, we then match that against the marketplace. And we start to talk about, what are the trends that are going out on the marketplace that this composite could fit into. And we do a lot of brainstorming around that. In addition, and you can take all of this information and share it with friends and colleagues and mentors and people that you care about, and they can add to it and they can comment on it and they can give you suggestions. We also administer things like the Myers-Briggs personality assessment because we think that that's a great tool for, and you can do this yourself. It's a great tool for figuring out kind of work environments that work for you and types of bosses that might work for you or type of partnerships that might work for you, relationships that might work for you. So lastly, on the list of 4 top tips for taking hold of the transition process, I've learned that enlisting an advisory team is critical to your success. And I'm not alone. I mentioned that I had an abrupt change to my identity 3 years ago. And it wasn't until I spun out for a couple of months, and I ended up on a leave of absence. And I was really fortunate. My mother, hearing my call for help, suggested that I come to a summit, that hence the name, that she was going to organize, that was going to take the people who knew me best to help me transition. And it was through that process that I actually decided to launch the summit. But what really happened was I was given the opportunity to be, to share who I was at that time and posit a goal that I needed to get accomplished and use my trusted advisors to get there. And it's great. There's this, recently I was reading Harvard Business Magazine, this article about these 2 Stanford psychologists who said that self-improvement should be a group activity, because what they found is that the most successful efforts of self-improvement have other people at their core, right? So, I mean, if you consider things like Weight Watchers and AA, which are quite famous in that, but truthfully, there's a number of reasons why it's important to have others kind of be part of this process. And one, I love this idea that there's a self-affirmation theory. And the self-affirmation theory goes something like this. For all the people who, for example, if you ask somebody who didn't necessarily track the amount of money they spent in a week, if you ask them how much money they spent in a week, it would be significantly less than they actually spent. So we don't have that trusted eye all the time on our own activity or behavior. So what a circle of trust or advisors can do is they can help us calibrate where we're effective and which talents, are worthy of investment or not. And the people that are best positioned to help you with that are those that are, on the receiving end of your behavior. So if you had a colleague that you worked with for some time, you could go to that person and say, I think, I'm meant to be in a negotiation type of environment. And they could say, you've never been able to negotiate well. Or they could say, what a great idea. These are the 12 places I've seen you do that exceptionally well. And tied to this in particular to women, our health, honestly, is predicated on communing. There was a famous study in 2002 that came out and said that whereby they were studying men's response to stress, and they figured out that men's response to stress was fight or flight, whereby women was attend to children and commune and work together to problem solve. And as a result of that, that's contributed to our longevity. So that's a longer story, and I know we're running short on time. So I would just say don't underestimate the importance of communing, women to women, bring in men. Many of the women that we work with bring in their husbands, their brothers, their cousins who are men. So in summary, summon your inner CEO, become a Joy Researcher, make inventory fun, enlist an advisory team. I'm going to send you, I know Maggie said that she was going to put this in an email. I wanted to be sure you knew the remaining 7 recommendations for increased happiness. So please enjoy that. It's on our site under Catherine Sanderson 10 Strategies for Increasing Happiness. Above all, as I said, I would encourage you to take action. You are not alone. Everyone is feeling as you are, and it's just a question of taking action on your behalf to get to your next best place. And what it could be next for you, of course, the summit has a number of services available. We happen to have 2 retreats coming up in April, so you can go to our site and find those, and there's a good reduction in price for the early birds and for savvy ladies. And lastly, your last homework, I want you to, if you want to, email 10 people and ask them, what's the one challenge you would come to me to solve? And I think when you get those back, it's going to be illuminating. You're going to hear some things that you're probably used to hearing, and then you're going to hear some insights that are new, and it will give you a taste of what it feels like to reach out to your community and get some good feedback. And if you want another homework assignment, I'm happy to give it to you. Just give me a call. I have a lot of those. So here, my ladies, thank you so much for listening. And I'm totally open to questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Sheilah. I'll just remind everyone, if you have a question now, you can email info@savvyladies.org, or you can use the chat box here. And one of the questions we had come in is, I like the idea of being a Joy Researcher. Can you go over that again and how I can take the first step in completing that for myself?
Sure. Thanks for that question. Yeah, it's Joy Research. So it's meant to be easy. It's meant to be in my day-to-day, right? I think we have a propensity to look at what's not going well, but in your day-to-day, what is going well, right? So you can have a note, I have a notepad on my iPhone. I have a notepad in my purse that I'm writing things on all the time. So, and you could make categories. You could say, where was I? Who was there? What were the circumstances? What was my takeaway? Why was it a perfect moment, right? So you could come up with 3 or 4 questions for yourself that you're answering each time. And once you do that, even over the course of, a week, you're going to start seeing patterns, right? So it's going to be, I do really well when I am collaborating. I do really well when I'm leading. I am happiest when I am letting others lead. So you're going to be able to hear or see for yourself where your sweet spots are.
Okay, thank you. Another question we have for you is, what if you only have 2 of the 3 components of happiness that you mentioned at the very beginning of this presentation? Can you work towards that 3rd component, or does that mean you need a change?
I don't think that there's any make or break. I think what you want to try and do is, in the places where it's easy for you to document or do inventories or whatever, do that. Start where you have, or you feel success, or you want, or you feel easily compelled to do it. And then for those that aren't, again, I would reach out to others and posit the same question to them. Like, this is something I'm working towards. How do you do it? What are your techniques? What do you try? What are your habits, right, that help you, to take action, for example? I guess that's how I would suggest approaching it.
Okay, great, thanks. And I believe this is the last question we have, and it's, I do feel like I'm burned out at work, which zaps my energy to make any changes. Do you have any suggestion on getting myself in gear?
I think maybe I'll share the happiness thing, because self-care is probably the very first thing you need to do. And that's around, to the extent you have any energy to do anything other than just get through the day. My first thing would be to think about your personal health and, what you're eating, how you're sleeping, if you're exercising. And honestly, and I don't know if you have the means or whatever, I find it much easier to enlist other people to help me when I can't get my own tires inflated, right? So in order for the car to go forward, you just have to, artificially inflate the tires, even for a quick jump start. Because once you get out of that quagmire of, burnout, you start to see light, and professionals can help you do that.
Okay, good advice. All right, well, those are the questions we have for you, Sheilah. So I want to thank you for an excellent presentation, and we will be sending out the link and some of the information you shared towards the end, so everyone will have a chance to get that. And thanks to everyone for joining us today. And thanks again, Sheilah.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.